Welcome. It's our second roundup panel of the day, and we're talking about the London menswear show. So it's probably going to be our most exciting roundup because it's the most exciting collections of the season. And aptly, I've got a very exciting panel with me who I will let introduce themselves, starting with you, Robert.
Robert Forrest, freelance fashion consultant.
I'm Charlie Porter, I'm men's fashion critic at the Financial Times.
I'm Gordon Richardson, I'm the creative director of Top Man.
I'm Alex Fiore, I'm the fashion editor of The Independent.
That was the fastest set of introductions I think we've ever really raced round.
To the point.
Yeah,
what do people normally say? Normally they elaborate?
They just kind of consider
so
it
their
a
dogs
bit.
are
Blogger / model /
yeah.
kidding. So what were the highlights of the season? Alex, what stood out for you? What was amazing? I won't ask you to pick one show, but what were your peaks?
In London?
Yeah.
That's
why we're here.
Miriam Kirchhoff, Man generally, I liked the whole thing. Christopher Shannon, I thought was great. I really enjoyed Nazia's show, really enjoyed Siblings' show. I thought James Long was the best collection James has done. I really liked J.W. Anderson. I liked everything.
Yeah, you did like it.
There was a lot. I think it's really nice when you can't pinpoint one thing, you can't pinpoint 5 things. It just felt really great, and it was really exciting and interesting. And then you went to Milan, and it all went down, and which was very interesting for me. I went there and I was nowhere near as excited. You didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, whereas here you really did.
I think that's very true. I read in the piece you wrote in the Indie, you said the thing that's exciting about London is the ideas. And I think, would everyone agree with that? That's what...
I mean, the interesting thing was how, by the end of it, because we see all the London designers again in Paris because they take them to the London shows to sell. The interesting thing was how they were as exciting at the end of the season as they were at the very beginning. Particularly Craig, who's on our screen at the moment, which was one of the first shows we saw of the London shows, and it stands up against everything else we then see, and the same with a lot of the London designers.
But probably interesting what you see is what's being sold as much as what's on the runway as well.
Yeah, and also the fact that they are actually selling the stuff that's on the runway. The two completely.
I thought with Craig, for me, I wrote something about it actually on the blog on the Indie, because when I went to see it and to kind of physically handle the garments, there was a different experience of that. He was showing me the sweaters and how the sweaters have been tie-dyed and how the ribbing on the bottom of the sweaters was hand tacked on, so it looked like it was a sweater inside out, but actually it had been very cleverly done to make it appear that way. And there were lots of levels, I think, to those clothes, and they kept kind of surprising you when you were looking at them in detail. So the catwalk impression was one thing, and then experiencing the clothes physically was a different thing. And I thought that was very clever and very interesting.
It's that extraordinary complexity about his clothes, which is that there's the surface decoration, which obviously he's become kind of known for and sometimes is mocked for, but then there are these decks of silhouette, and then there's also the shape he's making, which I don't think anyone really notices, but it's quite a masculine form, but also quite boyish as well. Like he's set his own silhouette. He set such a template in like 2 seasons. It's such a...
But I don't get the chance to see the clothes, close up.
Yeah.
But that's an impressive show. And I think what you're saying, because when you start to see it online afterwards, you see that those clothes are kind of cut into all those tie-dyes in panels and things, weren't they? Which you didn't kind of get when they come out, because they're out there for such a short time. So I would understand that you guys having the advantage of seeing it close up, how complex those clothes actually are. Because if you take all the theatre out of it, they're still really good clothes.
That's interesting. Yeah, but do you think the headdresses overshadowed the clothes?
Not at all, no, because the thing is, I think the thing with Craig is that it's all about the unsaid, and it's all about unsaid emotion. It's this kind of explosion of emotion, this kind of adolescent young man, like kind of wave of like kind of anger or pent up stuff, and that really expresses that. And then the clothes then do all their other work. I think last season it was easier to see the different levels from the stripes. So I think some people thought this was, to begin with, was on one level because you couldn't see.
But I felt this was better integrated.
Totally,
the headdresses in this made more sense than perhaps they did in the first one, which were just what everyone talked about initially until you got to the clothes. And this clothing was much better, it was much more rounded.
He's also got a thing going on about shadowing, which was from his graduate collection, where he had shadows of, and he had one set that was black and one set that was white, or areas that were shadowed off. So I think there's something with this going on here too, because sometimes it's a kind of repeat of an outfit or a repeat of a head thing. So he's got so many different complex things going on within it, and then it's great clothes as well.
I'm interested because Craig Green is the person that everyone talks about. He seems to be the most exciting one. It's very natural that sort of unprompted we came to him quite naturally. Do you think would you like to see him develop? What do you think his future is going to be? What does he say about what London Menswear is saying on a sort of a world platform?
Well, don't you think he's part of the whole young independent group, but that there's still that whole Savile Row Classic thing going on here? What's great is that you can get someone like him showing in London who can be commercial too, and you get the classic side of the London men's fashion as well. And it's great that both can express themselves. I mean, Alex referred to Milan, which I think is very monotonous, one note, and it tends to be less interesting. Whereas London, you find that it's interesting because there's such diversity here, and you're able to show diversity here because of the nature of what London is. And
I think the thing about London right now is you don't know what to expect necessarily,
but
and
that's
that's what makes
about
it
fashion,
interesting.
yeah.
And you know, it's the only city in the world where this has come up from young designers. This whole event has been built from the ground up, if you like. Most of those other cities, it's built the other way around, isn't it? The young designers come in as the halo effect at the end. It's all been about the young designers and their support, and they've been building it and nurturing it, and then everyone else has suddenly wanted to come in on that. So to me, that is absolutely extraordinary, and it's a complete one-off, and it must be kind of protected at all costs.
The specific thing about Craig is that in the nuts and bolts of it is that he's only in his second season of Man, which Top Man Fund, we should say that it's part of their initiative with Lulu at Fashion East, and so he's got another season of that if he's passed by it, and then he's got the possibility of 6 seasons, I think, of New Gen.
I think it just depends.
And then,
yes,
and then the possibility of another 2 seasons of Fashion Forward. So if he goes through all the funding, he's supported for another 4 or 5 years. So he's got a long time to grow and nurture, which is the same with a lot of the ones we'll talk about. They've still got we're talking about them as if they've been around forever, but actually he's only been 2 seasons, and he's got a long time to work that out. But he has actually picked up some really good buyers for this collection, which I won't say because I don't know if we're allowed to, but he's done very well from this. If he can actually make it.
And they need the support. They can't just go out there and do one collection with no additional support. And if you see designers coming through, like Aggie and Sam, who have been through that journey a bit more, how they've kind of progressed is extraordinary in terms of like just having time to explore your craft and get better at it, and having your clothes up on rails afterwards that you then have to see buyers about. It's the whole experience. It's not just that. And I think sometimes like the whole thing's represented by that, but it is the after sales which are really important, because that's what we need in this country, don't we? We need that to kind of expand and take off big time. So it's not just about creative shows. There's a business behind it.
But I think that's what they are doing. They are supporting the designers to be able to sell, not just to show. And that's what's really interesting about what's happening.
So do you think we've got that balance right at the moment between selling and shocking? Because there's a lot of the press that London gets, and I know it's quite simplistic press, is about the shocking side of it. You know, we were talking before this about David Gandy Gate, but it is that kind of thing. You know, people like to focus on the shocking side of it. The
interesting thing is that tonight it's the opening of Club to Catwalk at the V&A, which is about 80s fashion, 80s youth and subculture, and I saw it last week, and the thing with it is things like Body Map and all these people that couldn't sustain a business because of the climate at the time, because of so many things, because of AIDS, because of the recession, like this whole kind of culture just disappeared, and that's why it's taken so long for this to come back, because it just was wiped out. But it's completely different now, right? I mean, Man's been going for 8 years now.
Man's 8 years, and New Gen Men's 4.
And some of the designers have now built up their own businesses, and it's a sustainable business. People have got the possibility to actually make something with a long-term future.
I think you're right. I think this is being noticed now because it's kind of out there in the bigger picture, and actually we're sitting here talking about it, whereas we could have been, in a way, talking about Man 4 years ago. You know, and actually having a conversation there, but it's really grown. So I think it is 8 years.
I think it's also about that people recognise that fashion isn't just fashion on its own. You have to have that commercial aspect too, to make it valid and to make it.
It's crucial these guys sell clothes. Otherwise, it's all a bit pointless, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's just theatre.
I think in the 80s that was a problem. There was no backing for anyone.
No backing.
There was no one behind everything.
Establishment support either, which I think the difference now is people that were young in the 80s are now the establishment, and they recognise, which is a wonderful thing. They recognise what went wrong in the fact that, you know, you think about even really basic things like Vivienne Westwood didn't get British Designer of the Year until 1990. It's like, that's ridiculous when you look at what she did in the 80s, but it was because she was a punk and she was a bad person. You know, you weren't supposed to support that sort of thing. Whereas I think now the mindset is totally different, and it is this idea that, you know, traditional suiting can exist, and the young avant-garde can exist, and the young avant-garde need to be supported.
Yeah.
You know, the suits are supported, but the suits should support the avant-garde as well.
And the nice thing is there is a total sense of community, the same as there was in the 80s. Like the total sense of community, but they're also it's a community that can then go global as well. Like the community is then the buyers that are coming from Japan or Korea or whatever. Like the global is now around the world.
I mean, this is a very enviable event, I think, right now.
Yes.
Everybody's kind of suddenly wanting, I think everyone's woken up to menswear, basically, and it needed this platform to kind of do it. It was always there, but there was never a platform for these young designers to kind of get going.
I think New York's keen to do something
New
now.
York's very keen.
Yeah.
But none of them understand altruism. None of them understand that you need to do something altruistic to allow young design to be allowed to flourish.
So none of you found any annoyance with bigger brands, you know, hijacking the buzz? So, you know, we had Rag & Bone coming back. McQueen obviously came back last season, which obviously felt very authentic, McQueen. But there are a few bigger brands returning to London. Is that a good thing? Obviously it is because it brings buyers, but is there a frustration in that? Well,
I guess long term it can't just be man and that. And there has to be a broader spectrum of things. But I think we just have to be careful about how it expands, really, so that the way it's reported, the way it's covered, and the cross-section of great designers in the UK is well represented. And I think there should be a cross-section. It's just that healthy balance.
Exactly.
The other thing is, like, you know, you think back to sort of, I know it's a long time ago, but you think back to 1995, and that was when McQueen was the person being slugged off by the Daily Mail for doing bumsters. You know, it's...
And McQueen did show some men's stuff in his women's shows.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there is that idea that I think that the young avant-garde of today will become the bigger brands of tomorrow. So I don't think bigger brands coming back to show in London is a bad thing at all. Because you'd never really say that about if a big brand went to Paris. Is that a good or a bad thing? You know, it's a great thing for Paris because it's a big brand with a lot of money, and it's the same for London. I think I don't think they're trying to hijack anything. I think it's a great kind of a great indication of London's stability. I spoke with Burberry when London Men's collection started, and they sort of made the point that it took them 25 years to show as part of London's women's collections, and they've ended up doing it at London Menswear within 3, which I think is within 3 seasons, not even 3 years, which I think is quite striking.
What did we think about the Burberry collection, Alex? You weren't too keen, right?
I didn't like it. Let's just say that.
Okay, Charlie, what?
I thought it was great.
Did
I
you?
thought it was great. I think that Christopher does well when he. Weirdly, when he focuses on Hockney, he's had a really great Hockney collection years and years ago. I think it was 2004 something. But I think he also does well when he looks at an older man that's slightly more relaxed and the clothes are kind of comfier and cozier and actually desirable to wear. I think sometimes it can be quite hard and aggressive, Burberry, or trying to be very fashion. But I thought this was just a lovely collection.
Yeah, it was less colourful Hockney, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was Hockney himself now as an older man rather than Hockney a bigger splash. So
it did have. Well, I think Burberry does have a very commercial aspect, and the clothes are very appealing. Obviously, it's a different client to the young independent designers, but there's room for everyone in this business.
I think it actually is a really, because it normally follows that the women's is like the men's. I think it's a really good sign for the women's that the women's can become a bit softer, because I think it has gone down a bit of a cul-de-sac of hardness and aggression, which I think doesn't necessarily sit with the idea of Burberry as this lovely, cosy world, which obviously we know it's this massive, great big £1 billion pound making company, but there was a softness to it which I thought was very appealing.
Alex, you made quite an... Sorry, Gordon, to cut you off. Alex, you made an interesting point about being closed for the internet, though, which I think is important to talk about, especially given that we're streaming on the internet at the moment.
I do. I might disagree about that. Just from the first image, I think he's got his hands in his pockets, and you straight away can see that they're pockets you want to put your hands in. And
I just was struck by the fact, to me, it looked so much better on the internet than it actually did in person. The colours popped better. It was very simple to read. For me, it was too simplistic. There was just nothing that I found exciting or interesting about it. I hated the shoes. I mean, I could go into specifics about various bits of it that I disliked.
Is that the first time the word hate's appeared in this discussion?
I just really hate, like, Clark's desert boots, but designer versions of... It just felt like it was lots of expensive versions of designer versions of a JD sports bag in coloured leather. You know, just... I don't know. I didn't find it kind of challenging and interesting enough. Although I do agree with what you said that Burberry has been very hard. I liked it actually when they did the African collection, which was a little bit of a cliche, but where it was like but with the raffia and kind of the idea of putting the hand back into the clothes. I really liked that because I felt like it was about trying to pull itself away from being this enormous cold machine. My issue with Burberry, probably more than the design, the thing I said about it was that the design didn't strike me, so I ended up thinking about Burberry as a company because I didn't feel I disliked bits of the collection and liked bits of the collection, but I ended up thinking about Burberry's ethos as a company, and that was more what I had an issue with.
I think I always think about Burberry, the company, when I'm watching Burberry, because you know that it's already been designed and shot to go on sale straight away online, and
which
I
think is
but the thing is that's what that company is. Like I don't expect any different. I don't expect a sudden Mrs. Prada. Oh, we made this 2 hours ago and it's amazing.
Yeah.
You don't expect a fashion surprise like that.
The thing about this show, though, whether you liked it or not, it is a statement, and it is. It's a kind of. I think what he did well. Because it's hard to criticise. I know what it's like doing a show, and you just stand there, you put something out, and it's going to work or not work. It was about stripping back to me, like take where everyone's been in print and pattern and colour and all of that. It was just taking that out and doing very simple pieces and ramping up the colour level and styling it that way with very, very simple shapes. Whether that's for the online business or whatever, it's still actually a very clever take on fashion, because it's really hard to do simple things incredibly well. And he does style it all, so I mean, that's not easy either in terms of putting stuff together. So it's again a very accomplished collection, and it is very. What's interesting is, I suppose if you were seeing Burberry for the first time, you would say that was a very simplistic show, which in the kind of way it is, but it is quite revolutionary because it's so different from the other things they've done before. So I think that's that is in a way to me taking a risk. It just happens that this is a quiet, it's a softer risk because it's taking a lot of energy out, but it's doing other things really simply and doing those very well. So I can see why you might criticise it because it seems overtly sort of simplistic. I mean, that was about the only pattern, wasn't it? I think it was a stripe and a couple of polka dots, and that was it. So it was all about colour.
It did seem less adventurous, especially going back to the African collection.
Yeah.
But then it did make a statement about colour. Yeah. I think, which is important too, from the man in the street to register something with that client, that customer.
Yeah. I was also interested as to, and I wondered if it was the first feeling of someone picking up on what Prada did last season and doing it, because Prada for me last season was about clothes rather than fashion, and this felt like it was about clothes, pieces. I think but then people didn't actually, that was the interesting thing going on. I don't feel like I didn't see a lot of Prada. I saw a lot of last spring Prada colour blocking rather than people doing what Miuccia Prada did last season, which was that wardrobe of clothes rather than a wardrobe of fashion for a man.
But do you think some people pick, like I found that quite interesting with Christopher Shannon's collection, because it didn't feel like it was about fashion, it felt like it was about clothes and a personal relationship with clothes and the clothes that you wear to express yourself. That whole, it's interesting that Charlie, you were talking about the V&A exhibition, because this was rooted in club culture and obviously it was 90s club culture, but for me this felt quite anti-fashion in a sense.
The interesting thing with Chris's show is he said, I don't know who he said it to, but he said something about how he had a complete other collection based on Mexico, which he got rid of, because it felt like he'd never been there, and he realised that it wasn't what he wanted to do, and this was him being free.
But it's interesting that comes up after Burberry, because actually that's about colour and colour blocking. But I actually do feel that feels so much more modern. And I like the way the colours are just sort of more tonally represented than the way Chris did it, like in blocking.
It's interesting, we're actually talking about him straight after Burberry, because he was straight before Burberry, and I think he suffered in terms of audience and press.
He was on before.
It's the awful thing of when you're the show before a major show, people are scared about whether they'll get to Burberry.
I loved all those Liberty print things. I thought it was great. And that was a different side to Chris that I wasn't expecting,
On the rail,
really
it's extraordinary as well.
styled.
On the rail, there's more and more of the prints, and it's
really?
because when I saw this at the show, I was slightly concerned about the button throughs, but that's my own personal thing about Chris's which I wear the whole time. So actually, in the showroom, there was a lot more kind of t-shirts and sweatshirts and prints, and the button throughs you kind of were less aware of. But
I love the shoes in this, by the way. That collaboration was great.
but it was a show that I just kept thinking of again and again and again. And Chris is one of the ones that really, him and James Long are the kind of two that first really made businesses, or kind of made a name that really showed they were going to stand alone in London. And he continues to do work which puts him in his own world. You know, he had like New Era caps for his Kidder collection, and like he really thinks about ways to build that's not just a linear, I'm going to show clothes at the show. He does create his own world.
No, I really liked his show. I thought it was great.
Let's talk about James Long, because we were saying before we went live it was one of the strongest collections he's ever done. But we've been saying that about a lot of people. What made this so spectacular? Why was London so great this season in general? I guess that's...
I think the breakthrough for James was that people really were talking about him, and from my friend Bruce from the New York Times, like he picked it as one of his top 5 collections. It was the real sense that people actually were really taking notice finally and really seeing James as a talent in his own right. James was actually great. It's his first season, I think, since he's fallen off the sponsorship cliff. Like he's now reached the end of his level, so he had to do a collection. It's why the word hard comes up sometimes, because he wanted to do a collection that was really hard and really specific, and it's actually done in the world of good. He had to really fight to get funding and fight to get money, and I think that experience really galvanised him and made him create a really coherent and specific.
Well, probably also had to put up the ante as well as making clothes that sell too.
Yeah.
As well as being creative and looking great on the runway.
Yeah.
He had to make clothes that sell so his business can survive.
Yeah. Exactly.
Talking about clothes that sell, we've looked now at Christopher Shannon, we've looked at Burberry, which is obviously going to have an incredible sell-through, and now we've looked at James Long. What are these reflecting about the way that the male shopper, the mass male consumer, what are they reflecting about how he's dressing and how he's changed? Maybe that's a good question for you, Gordon, obviously with Top Man. What is this saying about the changing ways that men are dressing? And normal men, not fashion men. Not that fashion men aren't normal.
There's been a phenomenal change.
Who is a fashion man? What's your definition of a fashion man?
You all look so angry, Charlie, that was a proper bitch.
Who is a fashion man? I mean, this is the thing today. Who is a fashion man? Could be anyone these days, no? Younger, older.
Yeah, but I think there's a feeling like it's like most people now, that the forefront now is about, at the very least, trying to look good and having much more knowledge about how to look good, because there's so much more information out there that you can kind of glean and take on board. So in a way, I think there is a pressure on the average male to step up to the mark, to try and look better than perhaps they had before. And we see this a lot in Top Man with our personal shopping. A lot more people use that as a service, whereas before, 2 or 3 years ago, it was like, well, I don't need a shopper, I don't need advice. And it really is just a sort of consultative thing. And I think with your journalistic side of things, and Charlie, yours, it's like there's that information is there, and you're telling them how to dress all the time, and they can see how to dress well according to what they need their dress sense to be, if you know what I mean. And you can almost take the word fashion out of it. I just think everything's gone up a level. So I think these shows are so crucial in sort of like taking it beyond that now and seeing like where this can all go. Because the confidence is out there. I'm absolutely convinced the confidence is out there. I mean, we see that in sales, so it must be happening everywhere else. There is a guy who just wants to dress well. And it's amazing how they're so on these shows. They know the real fashion consumer is so on this. They want this now. They know about all these young designers. They're not just odd designers that somebody sort of happens to come across. They've got fans already who are totally following them day to day. So
they're aware of the names and they're aware of what they do.
Totally aware of it.
I think an interesting thing is also this idea of what you call fashion, what you call clothing. There's that awful word which is the total conundrum of how you say the word without saying the word, which is streetwear, which is the worst word in the world ever, because these clothes clearly aren't streetwear because they're so belittling. It is fashion. It is a way of expressing personal character. But it takes the form of sweat tops or track pants or whatever, which is completely wearable and completely what men wear. So there's a link to reality. It's not an imposed fashion idea. And so many in this community are kind of making clothes for people they know that want them to wear their clothes. And there's an actual link. It's not just what I want that to. There's a few that are like that.
Bizarrely, I don't think streetwear's a bad word. Though.
I think it's a really bad word because if it's used in the wrong way, it's very demeaning. It means a lower level.
But to most people, it's just like different fashion, isn't it? I honestly don't think it's a bad word.
I think it's a bad word because like someone like Sean Sampson, I think he does really elevated work. But if you call it streetwear, then you're saying straight away it's there.
Yeah, but I think
it's a more it's a more elevated level of streetwear. It's like saying sportswear. People don't really understand. American sportswear.
Yeah, that's meant to be a different thing.
It's a different. It wasn't clothes for doing sports. That's interesting about the expression, but it's just they're great clothes. I mean, what he does is a better level of streetwear in a way.
Yeah.
I think also what's interesting in London is that you don't just see this one typical fashion show. It's not this one image. I mean, a regular guy looking at the show sees different body types, different physical types of guys. They're not all like skinny. Like going back to that Hediston Man look of Dior, which is very intimidating for a normal person, you know. And they're not just like always young boys on the runway too. You see a different mix of models on the runway, which I think is very interesting too.
It's interesting what Charlie said that ties to that exactly about, you know, people making clothes for their friends and for boys that they know want to wear them, because you see that even with someone like Martine Rose, you know, she found that guy that she always uses on the street and she just loves his look. And you get the vibe of that, I think, with this Sean Sampson collection as well. You know, it's about
you felt it very much
boys.
With Nazir's collection as well, with Nazir Mazhar, because that was, you felt like that he was just dressing people that he knew in a way that he wanted, in a way that he wants them to look, but in a way that they would want to look as well. There was such an honesty to what he did that I thought was really great and really clever, and it was really witty and humorous. And for me, Nazir's was absolutely fantastic because he just nailed exactly what he wants his label to be about and how he wants to dress people.
And crucially, it's not one of the important things about Nazir is it's not luxury. Like the price point is super low.
No, which was really impressive.
He's got an idea of fashion which doesn't involve being luxury, which I think is one of the crucial things about London.
He wants to be JD Sports.
Yeah,
it's like, you know,
he wants to have a mass appeal. A greater appeal, I should say.
Because in the conglomerate era, luxury and fashion linked up for the last 10 years, and I think London has shown that they can de-link, and that's the trap women's wear has got in the moment, is that London designers are all doing cocktail dresses, and they've suddenly realised that actually they need to do something which separates luxury and fashion, but they don't know how to do it, whereas it's happening in menswear.
Well, luxury is such a, I mean, what does luxury mean? I mean,
well, it's that, it's now
there's a major luxury label and everybody wears it, so what's luxurious about it? And I think that the fact that they're making things that, I mean, the designer has to have a vision, and they have to be true to themselves. But I think that's for the image of the show. But then, where they can go forward is having a collection where they actually can sell things to maybe a broader spectrum of people when they present a commercial collection. When you go to see it on a rail, so to speak, and you take away all the trimmings and all the showpieces, and you actually see the reality of the clothes that real men can actually wear.
The interesting thing about Nazir and also Sean and also Bobby Abley, who was part of Man, is and Astrid Anderson as well. They're all engaged in branding and overt branding again. And they use their word and their name as a, and they all do it convincingly as well. It doesn't look like one's doing it and the other's. It works for all.
They mean it. They mean what they do. Of course, that's why when Gordon mentioned that the clients are aware of the names. And they're aware of what people are doing, and they know the names because they're not just watching it online, but they're actually seeing the name as well. So it's driving home the point.
Well, the great thing about Nazir is all his fan base were there in the front row, weren't they? And I just loved that because it wasn't just an anonymous audience. There was already a fan base who were really actively involved in the show. And when pieces were coming out, it's almost like they wanted to jump up and wear them. Do you know what I mean? And that felt like he so knows what he's doing because there was the excitement around it straight away. It wasn't, what's this? It's like, yes, that's for me, that's for me, that's for me.
And this goes back to this idea of authenticity that's kept coming up, you know, this idea that what we're seeing, and I guess that ties into the branding comment you just made, Charlie, about it being very true and them having kind of a natural pride in what they're creating. And I wonder how the other side of London men's that we've all talked about, you know, the suited and booted crowd, whether the reason that doesn't seem quite as exciting as it doesn't seem to have that genuine...
The difference about the suits is that the suited side is that it's still trying to work out how to represent itself in a contemporary 21st century way, because the suit is a thing that has happened already and it doesn't evolve in the current format.
But then we saw someone like Alan Taylor playing with...
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's very much that's very much fashion. That's very much a kind of a different idea than the kind of you're not going to put Alan alongside Gives and Hawks, or it's a that's I mean, there is an idea of tailoring within a lot of the younger designers like Aggie and Sam, but there is still understandable, approachable shapes. It's not all sweatshirts and tracksuits,
but tailoring's I think it's because the young designers can look at tailoring with completely new eyes. If you're coming in with an established tailoring base, somehow to go, it seems like they're going in reverse to try and add excitement to it, because it's like you can do so much more if you're starting from zero, can't you? Like with your own collection and how you would interpret that in a more tailored way, say, for instance. But somehow it doesn't always ring true if it's the other way round, because it's like, oh, we might need to do something that's a little bit more extraordinary with our tailoring, so we'll go and do it in a odd cloth or an odd colour and cut it about a bit. Doesn't necessarily add up, because it doesn't make for any better tailoring, and it doesn't make that brand any better as a result of it. It's sort of almost a bit confusing for that brand. I don't know if I'm making sense on that.
No, that makes sense. Who was getting that right, do you think, across London?
That's a good question.
Because, you know, we see a lot of tailoring, which, as you say, it's got like a jazzy colour or it's a funny print. You know, it's not, as you say, moving forward, but who was offering something new?
I didn't see all the tailoring side, which sounds like a cop-out.
The tailoring side wasn't trying to be new, most of it. It wasn't.
Well, usually they usually use colour, or like someone like Jonathan Saunders, they do a classic jacket in a collar or a pattern. I didn't see it personally, but didn't Lou Dalton do tailoring, but everything was inside out?
Inside out. But again,
which is where you get people be adventurous in what their idea of tailoring.
I do. Sam have some tailoring in theirs.
I do actually think there's something to be done next in London about supporting a different idea of young fashion, which isn't just what gathers itself around man, which is always in a radical idea. That there should now be some sort of funding that supports people like Lou Dalton, or even Alan, but like who want to do kind of new tailoring or a new idea of kind of accessible. Because Lou didn't really get funding for quite a while. She was a new generation, wasn't she?
She's had some support, obviously, from us.
She's one of the ones that's completely striding out on her own to define herself and completely set up this amazing business that kind of sits in its own territory, and she's a complete individual and completely got an audience that wants her clothes. I thought some of these clothes were beautiful.
So what kind of, you mentioned that we need to see some other support system. What would you like to see in place, and why can't they also be on the man runway, balanced alongside?
Just the way that Man is a not-for-profit organisation that's set up by Lulu, so it's kind of within the image that's what it is. It has to be a particular feel of person, and that's part of its beauty. You can't say Man has to do this. It has to feel right for Man. I also think anyway there needs to be a different sort of system to encourage young tailoring or young kind of classic menswear, or like some sort of
Yeah, but it depends on what facilities there are. I'm sure Gordon would know more about this, but you know, tailoring is probably done as you know, is done in a certain way. There's knitwear, there's jerseys.
Yeah, but
you need someone who does tailoring, who's, if you tell them to rip the sleeves off or rip the insides out, that they're going to do it for you.
Yeah.
So the young designers need to maybe find someone who's willing enough to be adventurous, as they would be adventurous.
I mean, by tailoring, I mean a broader idea of kind of like men's more kind of casual,
Well, it'd be nice to find a mix of the sports street kind of look mixed with tailoring, where it moves tailoring on to be more contemporary rather than just being that Savile Row idea of what a suit should be. I think in general that's something that's the same in women's wear too. As far as the production availability in England is what you can do, how adventurous manufacturers are.
I suppose also it comes back to your comment about the sport and street thing, and now we're talking about tailoring. It's like they are standardised definitions of fashion, aren't they, in some respects? So maybe one could break down that barrier of tailoring as well, to the point where, I mean, if you take Aggie and Sam, you take Lee Roach, you take a little bit of Lou Dalton, they're all exploring those boundaries and doing something quite new, which isn't totally tailoring and isn't totally sport and street.
I think it's
so
interesting.
It's like we're redefining fashion for fashionable males, aren't we? And it's a combination of all those things.
It's quite interesting that we divide those, or that there is such a division between those, which I think if you talk about women's wear, there isn't. We wouldn't say that there is a designer who is a women's wear tailor, really. Or you certainly wouldn't say there's a group of designers that do that. Whereas in menswear, there's very much, we're talking about the suiting people, the tailors. There's a tailoring group, and that's what they do. They don't really expand beyond that. And it's almost because they because they have kind of the lockdown on that the young designers don't really do tailoring, because there's someone that does it very well and kind of deals with that area.
I also think it's to do with the change in men themselves, and the fact that most men, or I'm saying most, and probably that's quite an exaggeration, but there's a vast number of young men who don't need a suit to go to work, whereas 20, 30 years ago you needed a suit to go to work, and so it's no longer part of the psyche of young designers to think.
It's also the fact if you do need a suit, it has to be, it has to be navy blue, it has to be black. If you do need a suit, it can't be an exciting suit, it has to be a certain type of suit.
But I can be here and argue the point that actually our suit sales are the
really
most growing price bit.
Because there was a fashion thing.
So that's not necessarily true, that it's that you don't need a suit there.
But you need
the younger
you
generation,
want to wear it rather than need a suit.
You want to wear it.
It's a different
Bizarrely,
thing.
it's almost an alternative to what you did wear before. So it's almost like I'm actually more fashionable because now I'm wearing a suit.
And that idea can evolve into something.
And that evolves.
I guess you have that Tom Brown thing, which is again is somebody that plays with or used to play much more with suiting traditions, and that idea of he likes the idea of a man going out and getting drunk in a suit. He thinks the suit can be quite a rebellious item of clothing, which I do think is true. But I think in London, because we have these restrictions, or because we have these traditional schools, that tailoring is this kind of establishment. It's almost like you're rebelling against it by doing something that isn't tailored.
But I think in London you do see a suit on a younger man, maybe more casually, where the jacket is shrunken, is short. And I wouldn't even mention Tom Brown. I think it's something that's happened more organically in England, that young guys do wear suits. But then again, you see guys that maybe wear suits during the week for work. When they go out on the weekend, even to a restaurant or somewhere where they could be dressy, they wear just a shirt and trouser. In a sense, they're not wearing a jacket. But then it could be that the jackets actually are expensive. It could be a price point thing too, in a way, unless you're at a certain level where you're able to produce a jacket at a much better price.
I think the fascinating thing is about all this menswear stuff is there's this kind of hot kind of bubble of excitement in London that we're all really aware of. But when you talk about how men wear their clothes, it tells you that there's still so much to do, and there's so far to evolve. Like this kind of cycle of change in menswear is only just beginning, and the man stuff and the London stuff is kind of right at the heart at the beginning.
But the thing I find quite interesting when we were talking about the more, I don't want to say streetwear, the more casual clothes, compared to that, I'm going to say another horrible phrase, sport looks thing that you saw in Milan and in Paris, that felt much more costumey. This feels like what people can actually wear. Whereas I loved Raf Simons, but Raf Simons was 90s sportswear. It wasn't today's sportswear. It was a retro sportswear reference. And then you saw kind of some dreadful stuff in Milan that was very referential of retro sportswear and colour blocking, and that it didn't feel contemporary, whereas you feel like you look at what Nazir did, you look at what Sean Sampson did, you look at what Christopher and James Long did, you can imagine those being worn as is, which I think is quite interesting.
It looks more real. In Milan it looks too pretentious.
Too looks.
Well, you look ridiculous, basically. Like, look, here am I with all my money labels on. But in London, I think it looks more real, it looks more genuine.
I think it's also that idea that they're dressing people they know, they know the people that would wear that. Whereas in Milan, we're doing sports.
Yeah. And they're trying to imagine this person that they don't really know that it exists.
That was the point with Nazir. That audience was his audience. They knew what they wanted from that collection straight away.
But also Milan is suffering from this thing of they're trying to run away from doing suits because their country's in crisis, and so the idea of them doing a business suit collection is completely off. It wouldn't work for them. So they have to do something which is, so that's why it was all sports luxe. It's like, what do men do? They go on their yachts.
Well, it's a way to spend money, but I think also the problem there is that in Milan they've lost the plot a little bit, in a sense that everyone's moved away from Italy in a way. I mean, of course, there'll always be the made in Italy label. Customers will always respect that for quality and type of workmanship. But they are looking to people in England, say, to buy fashion that doesn't have that same look. And
That's interesting.
London has moved into that kind of area where they can really blossom and grow and take advantage of this whole breadth of older men, younger men, the youth look, the classic look, and it's fantastic.
But it takes time for these sorts of things to nurture,
because
buyers will come and they'll have just a general interest in it the first couple of seasons, but they won't necessarily be buying very much. And also, if they have bought, they have to wait to see if that sells before they can repeat buy, and then they know what audience attracting. So now suddenly we're reaching that sort of momentum where the money will be more available because they'll be coming to London, they'll be willing to place orders, they've perhaps trialled some of the designers already to, you know, good or bad success, but at least they'll know where they want to put the money and they'll reserve that money. And I think that's the crucial thing, because up until now they haven't reserved that money.
No.
That money's been spent elsewhere, and they've dabbled a little bit. But that's when these designers can really start to flourish, when they have bigger orders, and as long as they can deliver those orders with the backup that
and
they
keep
have,
their head as well.
and keep their head and keep their you know, don't suddenly fall foul of, okay, it's that sold, so I'll repeat that, which is the dangerous thing, which is what every business has to do. But when you're a young designer and your whole business is based on creativity, you need to kind of always be pushing creativity, but understand that market that you're operating in.
I think keeping the head is one of the crucial things, because Chris Shannon and James Long grew it without this attention, any attention. Like the Daily Mail sidebar would never have done the Chris Shannon show like 4 years ago, and whereas now Craig Green on his second show is mocked on TV, like it's a national talking point, and they need to really, which is amazing, but also they need to, you know, they're growing in the spotlight. It's a,
as long as they don't play to that spotlight,
which
stay true to themselves. No, they won't. I don't think they will.
But I think
it's crucial that they don't.
Because I mean, I think they're all hitting their stride, but it's how they move on from here. Because as Gordon said, you can't keep doing the same thing again, because people won't buy it. But then you can't move too far away from, and that's what I think happened. It used to happen in England a lot, was that people did something completely different next season. And you have to maintain a little bit of continuity for the buyers to be able to follow you. If you jump from one look to another look, they're like, who is this designer? And the customer doesn't understand who the designer is either. Whereas these young guys and women are actually kind of moving forward organically, so they're sticking to who they are and what they do. But the customer can follow them, and the buyer too.
So before you mentioned Astrid, and Astrid's a key example of someone whose look is the same as her graduate collection. You know, her look doesn't move beyond, but what she does is it's stealth. She suggests something a bit more each season, and creates this cult. These men like lap the stuff up.
But then how will these men grow with her when they grow, as the years advance and they grow older?
I mean,
will she stick with this younger guy, or will she move with her customer?
Her price point is that it's not necessarily a younger guy buying it. It's actually it's a.
Because at the end of the day, it's the cash register, it's just the old-fashioned cash register, which is what keeps the business going too, as you know. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people are coming to London, they're looking at London, but do they all go and buy in Paris? Are they following through with their orders that they're placing? Are they actually putting pen to paper when they finally see the collections in Paris and actually ordering? Or are they saying, well, we spent our money in Italy again, or we spent... Because the big behemoths, these big companies do take all this budget from everyone and leave very little for the smaller guys like this, which is another big problem in the business too. No?
I think they are starting to. I think they are following through. I mean, it's obviously a long way to go, and if you're talking about big majors like Barnes or whatever, then obviously that's another world.
Manufacturers like the Pradas and the Gucci's and these big groups that they take big budgets from people and they leave them shops with no money left to spend on small independent people. But this is what drives the fashion business, the newness, the innovation.
I think Astrid's a very good example of her understanding her market and slowly building it, because she does have very similar pieces like the lace things and that have been going through all her collections. I think she might have dipped out of it one season slightly. But when you talk to her, she knows the buyers are asking for that. So what I really like about her though is that she acknowledges that. But she won't do it the same. She'll do something completely different, but it will be that aesthetic that she knows somebody's bought into before, like a Barney's or whoever's bought it. But then that's just one part of the collection. So then the rest of the collection builds around that. The danger is when they only build a collection from the one viewpoint that's always selling. And I think she's just really, really clever at taking it very subtly into different directions every season.
Well, also clever in the fact she's dealing with the buyers too, so she actually knows what the buyers are looking for. She's not a designer, which many used to happen, is that designer never had anything to do with the commercial aspect of the business.
But these young designers are
when you talk to them, in everything, in all aspects.
They totally want to be involved, don't they?
Well,
I mean, they're more interested in that than anything else, because they're not in this for just sort of like a one-off. They really want to have successful businesses, and so they're willing to learn and they're willing to listen to everybody. I mean, a lot of them have mentors within the business, which I think is great, and that's encouraged by the BFC. But that's really, really important. important, because then they can go into bigger businesses and just kind of understand that business from their perspective.
Charlie, we talked a little bit about the buying just then, and you do write a lot about this on your blog, what's being picked up by who. Are our buyers in London supportive enough of the young?
It's interesting. I think London hasn't had, since Penny shut how many years ago? I mean, there's not really been. I mean, there's Machine A, which kind of it's been quite strident this year in kind of reopen. Was it this year it reopened? I think, and
yes.
They're quite strident in setting a kind of new agenda for a small boutique in London. But there isn't the culture because of, like, I don't know, the price of rent, I'm guessing, and all these things. The idea of a small boutique, certainly. Well, I would love there to be like a Hyper or a Kensington Market where young designers can sell their work for barely any rent costs. So there isn't that culture here. So actually most of the buying is from Korea, Japan, it's from abroad, which then makes it very interesting to write about, because obviously when you write, oh, the buyers in Korea, it's like, actually I've got no idea what that means. I've never been to Korea, so but it's interesting that they do, and they're selling to them. Like that's they're understanding that that's as valid as being sold in London.
Surely those clients travel to London too, so they should be the shops in London should be thinking about that as well.
Well, I think in fairness, Liberties has done.
They
have really stopped and got behind young designers, and
they're all Selfridges
really,
do the bright
really
young things, which is quite. I mean, the other thing that I find quite interesting as part of New Gen, when we've discussed certain designers and tried to figure out why they have so many stockists overseas rather than stockists here, I sometimes think it's the idea of what London fashion represents to an outside eye. Is that idea that it exports really well because it represents London really well, and that's kind of what a lot of the time what people want to buy is this idea of London fashion, and if they buy this designer, it's very London and it will appeal to people that like London fashion. Which I think is an interesting idea, particularly for places like Japan and Korea, where I think they are buying into a certain idea of what young London fashion represents, which is interesting.
Talking of young London fashion, let's talk about medium couture, because we were talking before we went live, and I think for a lot of people, medium couture kind of sum up London in a sense. It's completely bonkers, it's mad. This season was quite sinister, it was quite distressing.
I thought it was so romantic.
Alex loved it.
I thought it was the most romantic show. I thought it was a love letter. I thought it was a total love letter to each other. I thought it was so like.
I thought it was about childhood bullying.
Oh really? I thought it was so tender. I thought it was the most beautiful show. Like,
I thought it was very romantic.
Yeah, completely
I thought
dark.
it was very emotional. It felt very heartfelt. I think that's what I appreciated, was that they'd obviously put an enormous amount of work and effort into the clothes, and it showed, not in a way that they hung heavy, but that it felt like there was a lot of soul behind what they'd done, and that was something that I found very kind of endearing. It felt quite warm and kind of affectionate. I really liked that about it. It didn't feel like it wasn't product. It was, it was fashion. It had been fashioned by them. There was something incredibly personal about it. I think there always is with what they do. I think it's never not got their blood, sweat and tears into it. They're so insistent on what they want to do and what they want to say, and that's what I've found was really great about it.
We should say it's not on screen because it was kind of impossible to photograph. So like it's it was a performance where two models walked out and one had got loads of clothes on. Well, you didn't realise that to start with, but then he shed his layers and handed them to his fellow model who held them, and then they walked off together. It was very simple, but really eloquent. And the layers were like kind of floral, sheer. I was away,
which
so
really
I could barely see, but
which really weirdly synced up with other things like the florals. Then you saw florals everywhere else, and just things. Also, I thought it was that very interesting thing of their menswear and their womenswear mimicking one another. It was effeminate menswear, which I always think it's interesting and they did it in a very sort of challenging way as well. I think in a very kind of blatant way, and it's still that taboo that you can't really dress a man as a woman, which I thought they dealt with that in a very kind of eloquent manner. And it just had so much of them in it. I feel it's impossible not to love it, because it's so. When you can see how much they've put into it, it's really difficult to smack something like that down when there's so much emotion behind it.
You mentioned dressing men as women, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we've talked a lot about masculinity, but I want to talk about like gender lines being sort of blurred, because that's, I think, one of the biggest things from London season upon season, It's what these young designers, it's what makes them so exciting, is there's not any kind of established taboos for them that they're not willing to break. And JW Anderson is obviously a good example of that, but what are your thoughts on how sort of gender's being approached?
I think the interesting thing about gender is actually it doesn't need to even be about men dressing as women or whatever, because the number of women that we know that wear men's clothes, it's like, I mean, Lulu and all that, they're wearing, they're going to place all these designers, they're wearing men's clothes. So I think actually sometimes when it's a overt show of, oh, this is a men's clothes, but it's a woman's clothes, I find it sometimes a bit too on the surface.
But I think you can look at things like Astrid using the Sophie Hallett lace, I think, which is incredibly, you look at that and it's incredibly feminine. I think there's, for me, I do think there are still kind of taboos in menswear, which is, I always say the two taboos are you can't dress a man as a child and you can't dress a man as a woman. And I think it's very interesting when you see designers addressing those kind of ideas, the idea of, I'm not necessarily saying putting them in a dress, but putting them in something that has a feminine detail or something that buttons up the back, which seems like a very basic thing of, you know, if a silk shirt buttons up the back, it's a blouse. If it buttons up the front, it's a shirt. You know, there's that. So I think there's and that's the nice thing about menswear. There are these conventions that you can challenge so easily. I guess because it's so rigid in a sense.
I think the thing for me is as long as they're challenged when you actually are thinking about why it is that the blouse first was buttoned at the back, rather than, oh, it's a blouse buttoned to the back, therefore let's do a man in it, and therefore that's challenging. You have to actually think, well, is it buttoning at the back because then it makes the front more attractive because women have breasts.
Is there a reason
men don't have breasts, so therefore we can button down the front. So just to challenge by putting a man in women's details isn't necessarily a challenge to me. Also, I think as well, there's so much to do with like neck hair, like. There's so many clothes like don't look good against a man because they've got rough skin around here, whereas women don't have neck hair. You know.
So you weren't a fan of the halter tops at J-Dub's then?
Do you know what? I thought J-Dub's collection.
Their shoulder.
I thought J-Dub's collection was his most accomplished he'd done because there was an idea of fit around the back. My thing with J-Dub, which I've said from the beginning, is that I always want there to be more of an idea of fit in the clothes.
You've had a problem with his trousers before.
Yeah, and I've said it. I've said it to him. Like it's the look of the. It's just the look of the. They just don't fit. And I think especially last season it was a problem for me because the collection was meant to be obsessed with the body, but yet the clothes were doing anything but touching the body. Like they were round and draped and whatever, but they weren't actually engaging with the body itself. And if you're going to deal with gender, you need to deal with the body, what the body is, rather than it's the body and it's draped around it. That's my. So the fact that there was seams at the back, there was some sort of fit at the back, I thought made more interesting clothes. It doesn't.
But you don't like this Oxford bag kind of look?
It does.
Which is not new.
Yeah.
It's kind of an old look anyway.
I thought they were better trousers, but as again they weren't. But they don't look like they would do anything particularly romantic in their movement. They kind of are just there. I don't see this as taboo breaking. It's fashion. I don't. That's the thing with it. It's not. I'm not startled by it.
That something's been going on since the 70s. I mean, people wore roll neck shirts in the 70s. Yeah. I did, I think, with zips up the back. So that kind of front back thing's not new. It's been going on for a long time. But
So was there anything that was taboo breaking for you this season?
For me, in London, I don't know if I felt taboos. I mean, I would say Medium Kirchhoff definitely was confrontational, but I think that's just how they are. So I don't think that's a taboo to break because it's so natural to them that it's not a taboo break.
No.
How about you, Alex? Because you love saying that things aren't challenging. Was there anything that challenged you? Fashion face.
I'm trying to think.
But you like J-Dub, don't you? You're
yes, I did.
And
I like that.
And you like this collection?
I did like this collection. I'm not sure if I'd say it was especially challenging, because I think actually it was building a lot on. The interesting thing was how much it built on the resort collection that he'd shown a week before, and also that it synced up with what he showed for autumn. You know, it feels like there's a continuum between his collections, and that was very interesting. And also a continuum in the way that he's kind of the way that he shows men as well. So it felt very obvious, not obvious, that's the wrong word. It felt very natural to me that he would do a very rounded the last time it was very rounded, and then so this time he does the opposite, which is this very linear collection. I'm trying to think if I was I did find Medium Kirchhoff challenging in that it was confrontational, and also that there was I really like it when they challenge our kind of conceptions of a fashion show and the kind of the system of fashion, and I think that was very much what that show was about. As you said, it was a nightmare to get pictures of, which could kind of have been the point, you know. There's so, especially when you go to, having gone to Milan and seen the number of sort of you know, finales that were made for kind of Instagramming in Milan and in Paris, you know, all the boys come out at the end and they all stop, and then you can all take decent pictures, and then to do something that was so difficult to document was quite interesting. I think Craig Green challenges people. I think the idea of those structures, I've always wondered if those structures are almost kind of daring you not to see the clothes underneath. It's almost like you have to look, he puts that there as you have to look beyond it to see the clothes. It makes you look harder at what he's doing. And I find that very interesting, the idea that a designer's willing to kind of challenge you to really investigate the clothes. And when you go and discover them, and there are all these layers that, you know, it looks like a massive tie-dye, but there's so much work in each of them. I think it's great that he's willing to surrender to this catwalk gesture, and then you have a different experience when you go and discover the clothes. So yeah, there's challenging stuff. I think you can always be challenged, if you think about what people are doing, especially in London, because designers are doing it because they have something to say. They're not doing it because they want to make a quick buck. There's much easier ways to make money than to be a fashion designer. But I think a lot of people think it's some sort of glamorous, wonderful,
I know them
that money spews out at you when you make something, and it's not, especially not in London. It's like difficult. That. It's hard, like James Long said, it's hard. And you've got to be really dedicated. I think that was the really interesting thing I found in London. They were all dedicated to the visions that they had, and they were sort of dedicated to dressing real people. It wasn't some sort of weird archetype. There was a sense of reality to what all of them do.
Well, it's getting so hot that I'm about to pass out, so I think we should wrap up.
As a woman, what do you think about J.W. Anderson's men's look?
I never approach collections like that. I never think of them as like, I'm a girl, what would a boy? Because that's what I find most interesting about collections, is that genderless aspect. I think we shouldn't think of it like a boy or a girl.
Quite asexual,
Yeah, but I think again, I never would approach a collection from a sexual point of view. Like, would I want to sleep with a man that wears that? Because I think that's what tailoring's about. That's what David Gandy's about.
David Gandy's about, is it?
No, but that's what I find weird, is you look at this man that is wearing this thing that is all about, masculinity. It's like a three-piece suit, and he's the least sexually attractive person ever when he's wearing that. It's an old-fashioned idea of masculinity. Yeah, exactly.
The thing is, I think this looks so well. I mean, I know you said the comment about the fit, but it looks so well done. And I think that's really what's great about London, is actually the clothes now, rather than what was happening in the 80s, actually well made. They look good. And however crazy they are, or however ridiculous they might appear to a man in the street or to a David Gandy, that they're well made and they're well done, and there is some sense of quality and something there that you can buy into.
I think the interesting thing about the gender thing as well is actually, I think it was always assumed that menswear was also ran a women's wear, and women's wear was leaps and bounds ahead. And obviously it is in terms of industry size and this sort of stuff. Actually, I think it might be that menswear is leaps and bounds ahead of women's wear, because women's wear is stuck in this idea of you have to wear a cocktail dress, you have to have makeup on, you have to be fashionable. And actually menswear is allowing an ease and an expression of personality which isn't imposed upon you. And I think actually women's wear needs to learn a lot from what's happening in menswear in London right now.
But do you not think menswear in London is becoming, there's an element of it becoming slightly prescriptive in the way that women's wear is?
No, not at all, because the beauty of we saw on the panel for the New Gen thing. The beauty of it is that Nazir can come in. This lad turns up, and literally everyone's like, oh my god, of course he has to have. There's no prescriptive you're like this, you're like that. It's allowing young people to express themselves.
Coming in, so it doesn't get prescriptive. You have to avoid that for sure. That it doesn't become, this is what's going to be for the next 10 seasons in London menswear. It has to change. That's what fashion is, isn't it?
But I don't think it will be in the way it's been set up. Because man in itself is that kind of incubation period for those designers, when they can start to mature as designers and find their way. And I think by the very nature of what it is, it allows them to do that, and it allows them to feel freer perhaps at that particular stage, and then they kind of go to the next level. So, and what's so extraordinary when we sort of first started out on this, because Charlie, I've known through this period, is that there was a sort of raft of designers, and then suddenly there weren't quite as many, and then there was another sort of raft, and they had this sort of forward-back momentum. And I think what's happened is that there never was the platform, so young designers at colleges kind of were going, maybe I won't pursue menswear because really there's nothing for me out there, or I'll go and get a job in industry and work for a big fashion company, or I'll do women's wear because it seems like I can have a career in it. I think now what the colleges can see is that there's a menswear platform. So that kind of is going to open it up. So that will always ensure that there's this young talent coming through. And so we'll be in a situation where we'll just have more and more people wanting to kind of enter this arena from a young positioning. So to me, that will stop it ever becoming staid, because it's coming from that direction, which is what we talked about at the beginning.
There's nothing fickle about that, about people being kind of like that conveyor belt of young people, because that always gets a question in my head of where do they all go?
No, it's not
a conveyor belt.
Because it's like they're naturally excited they can actually do the thing they never thought they were ever going to be able to do. It is true that there is this sudden like mass of designers who need a slot on the schedule, so it's going to have to be like Men's Fashion Month in London soon. There's so many of them, but that's for us to work out as it grows.
But a lot of them just do presentations or some static thing, and I think that's important because a lot of them perhaps aren't ready to be totally on the catwalk at that stage, and I think everyone on the panel and the BFC sort of understand that, and rather than expose them too early on and sort of for them to fall flat, it's better to say, no, actually no, with the advice from everyone, you know, in terms of our knowledge of the business, that you're probably better just having something static for a couple of seasons to kind of engage with your audience and sort of learn about what it is you need to be crafting as a designer.
And a crucial thing is to always reset to zero. Like, so after Chris Shannon, don't expect another Chris Shannon. The man always resets to zero, and they're allowed to come in and start from the very beginning and define themselves. No one. It's like on Fashion East when there was Gareth Pugh. It's not that everyone then had to be Gareth Pugh. Like it resets to zero, and everyone's given their chance to be their own character.
Well, I was going to ask what we should expect for next season, but I guess we should just reset to zero.
We don't know.
Yeah.
That's what's exciting, though.
More excitement, obviously.
Should we give this season's designers and our wonderful panel a round of applause to wrap things up then? Thank you. You have to clap with me, guys. Come on.
Oh, we clap.